Welcome to Faith Wonders, where real stories of faith and miracles come alive from around the world.
Have you ever heard of a moment when heaven broke its silence and left behind a face? In the southern hills of India, where the mist hangs low over green forests and time moves at the pace of prayer, there is a small village called Vatican. The people there live simple lives. Their mornings begin with the tolling of church bells and end with the smell of incense drifting through coconut trees. At the heart of that village stands Christ the King Church, whitewashed walls, a modest cross, and wooden doors worn smooth by the touch of countless hands. On the morning of November 15, 2013, it was just another day of worship. Parishioners gathered for daily Mass, whispering their prayers, the rhythm of their faith unbroken through generations. Among them was Father Thomas Pathical, a man known for his calm voice and quiet devotion. He began the liturgy as he always did, his words steady, his movements measured, his heart at peace. No one could have imagined that in a few minutes something would happen that would echo across the world and challenge the boundaries between heaven and earth. As Father Thomas lifted the consecrated host, he noticed something unusual. There, in the center of the white wafer, was a faint shadow. At first it looked like nothing more than a smudge, a slight discoloration under the church light. But then it deepened. The shadow began to form lines, contours, shades that no candle or hand could have drawn. Within moments, the shape became clear, the outline of a human face. He blinked, thinking perhaps it was a trick of the light or his tired eyes playing games. But when he looked again, the image had grown sharper. There were eyes, soft and sorrowful, looking back at him. There was a crown of light above the brow. There was a mouth, not painted, not printed, but living, formed out of the very substance of the host itself. The priest froze. The congregation fell silent. The air itself seemed to stop moving. Someone gasped. Another began to cry softly. And then a whisper passed through the pews like wind through dry leaves. "It's his face," an old woman said, "the face of Jesus." The host in Father Thomas's hand now bore what looked unmistakably like the image of Christ. Not the polished face seen in paintings, but one marked with compassion and pain, the kind of face that could only belong to a Savior who had suffered for love. He placed the host carefully back upon the altar, his hands trembling. The people knelt. The silence that followed was so deep it felt like the earth itself was listening. Even the candles flickered lower, as if humbled by what stood before them. The image did not fade, not after minutes, not after hours. Word spread quickly. By the afternoon, villagers from miles away began arriving at the church. Some came barefoot, others holding rosaries, all drawn by the same unseen force. They stood outside the small chapel, whispering prayers through tears. Some were skeptical. Others fell to their knees without question. But every face that entered left changed, as if they had witnessed something that the world could neither create nor explain. As the sun set over the Kerala hills, the church glowed softly in the evening light. The host remained visible, untouched, resting quietly upon the altar. The people called it the face in the bread. In the following days, the parish priest reported the event to his superiors. The church was sealed, photographs were taken, samples were collected. Experts would soon arrive, scientists and theologians alike, each searching for an answer to the same impossible question. How could such an image appear and remain within the sacred bread of the Eucharist? Was it an accident of moisture and light? A chemical reaction unknown to man? Or was it something far beyond what human reason could measure? A message from the divine, silent yet unmistakably present. For the next 12 years, that question would not leave Vatican. It would travel from village to diocese, from India to Rome. And though the image was studied under microscopes and light spectrums, its mystery refused to vanish. Through all those years, one truth remained. The image on the host did not fade. Not with time, not with light, not even when kept under controlled conditions. It was as if the face had been imprinted not upon the bread, but upon the very faith of those who had seen it. The villagers of Vatican still remember that day. They remember the way the air felt different, the way the world seemed to pause for one sacred heartbeat. Some say it was the moment God reminded humanity that He still walks among us, hidden in the simplest forms, in silence, in prayer, in the breaking of bread. 12 years later, this quiet miracle would resurface in the halls of the Vatican, examined by science, affirmed by faith, and finally declared authentic, a Eucharistic miracle unlike any seen before in India. But before the recognition came doubt, debate, and waiting. The kind of waiting that tests faith and, in testing, refines it. And it all began here, in a small church at the edge of the forest, on a morning like any other, when the face of Christ appeared in the light. The morning of November 15, 2013, had begun like any other in Vatican. Birds flitted between coconut trees, children laughed as they ran along dusty paths, and the village prepared for another day of work and prayer. Inside Christ the King Church, the faithful gathered in hushed anticipation, unaware that a single Mass would soon redefine their understanding of the divine. Father Thomas Petickle moved with calm precision, arranging the chalice and sacred vessels on the altar. The scent of incense mingled with the earthy aroma of wet clay floors, and sunlight filtered through the stained glass, casting rainbow fragments across the pews. Parishioners bowed their heads in reverence, murmuring familiar prayers, hearts attuned to the rhythm of ritual. This was the ordinary, a Sunday morning made sacred only by faith and devotion. As the liturgy progressed, the moment approached that Catholics hold most dearly, the consecration of the Eucharist. Father Thomas, as he had done countless times before, lifted the host, his eyes briefly meeting the faithful. But this time, something unusual caught his attention. A faint shadow appeared at the center of the wafer. At first, he dismissed it, a trick of light perhaps, or a speck of flour. Yet the shadow deepened, forming lines and contours that seemed almost purposeful. Then, impossibly, a face began to emerge. It was subtle at first, a suggestion of eyes and mouth, but clarity grew with every second. The lines of the image were delicate, yet unmistakably human. Soft eyes gazed outward, a gentle, sorrowful expression that spoke of love and suffering. Father Thomas's hands trembled as he continued the ritual, uncertain whether he should announce what he saw or keep silent. The parishioners noticed his hesitation. They leaned forward, curious. Some whispered prayers, while others simply stared, their breaths caught in their throats. And then, slowly, word spread through the small congregation. The host bore the face of Christ. At that moment, the ordinary Mass transformed into something eternal. The whispers of the faithful grew into stunned murmurs, the quiet hush of devotion turning into a palpable awe. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the presence of the sacred made visible. Others held their hands over their hearts, tears streaming down their faces as they prayed silently. Father Thomas carefully set the host back on the altar. His voice, when he finally spoke, trembled as he completed the prayer, yet his reverence remained intact. The congregation remained kneeling, united in wonder, sensing that this moment was far greater than any human comprehension. In the hours that followed, the church became a beacon. Villagers from surrounding areas arrived, drawn by word of mouth. Families walked for miles, children clinging to parents' hands, the elderly leaning on canes yet moving with urgency. All came with a mixture of faith, hope, and skepticism, eager to witness the phenomenon that had transformed a simple Mass into a miracle. Photographs were taken, and the host was carefully preserved. The local parish priest documented every detail, noting the time, the reactions of the people, and the sequence of events. He understood the gravity of the situation. This was not merely a local wonder, but a potential message for the world. In those first days, the reactions varied. Some doubted, attributing the image to moisture, light, or human error. Others saw it as divine intervention, proof that God was present in ways beyond human understanding. Discussions in the village ranged from hushed conversations in homes to animated debates in markets. Each person carried the story in their hearts, spreading it cautiously yet eagerly. The bishop of the diocese was notified, and soon experts began arriving to assess the event. Scientists examined the host under microscopes, theologians reflected on its spiritual significance, and doctors considered whether any natural explanations could account for what had appeared. Despite all scrutiny, no explanation sufficed. The image persisted, unaltered by time, unchanged by handling, impervious to examination. It existed as both a physical phenomenon and a spiritual message. The Mass that had begun as routine became eternal, not because of spectacle, but because it revealed the presence of the sacred in the ordinary. The host, a simple wafer of bread, became a canvas for the divine. It reminded the faithful that miracles often hide in plain sight, waiting for hearts ready to recognize them. Villagers describe the experience as life-altering. They speak of an almost tangible warmth, a sense that the Church itself had become a threshold between the earthly and the divine. Some returned daily, kneeling before the altar, praying for a glimpse of the face that had transformed a moment of ritual into an encounter with eternity. By the end of that week, the news had reached the diocese, and the process of formal investigation began. The host was carefully stored, its image preserved for study. Letters were sent, reports compiled, and samples taken. Each day brought new visitors, pilgrims, and the silent anticipation of a world waiting to understand what had transpired in that small Kerala village. Yet even amid the attention, there was a profound stillness. The miracle did not shout. It did not demand recognition. It simply existed, quietly inviting the faithful to pause, to wonder, and to believe. It was a reminder that the sacred often reveals itself not in grandiosity, but in subtlety, a whisper rather than a roar, a face in a humble wafer rather than in blazing light. The ordinary Mass had become eternal, not only in the eyes of the villagers, but in the hearts of those who would hear the story. And as the initial awe settled into reflection, the world outside Villicaner remained unaware of the miracle, waiting for the unfolding of a journey that would take 12 years to reach its conclusion. For now, in the quiet corners of that church, prayers continued. Hands were folded, heads bowed, and hearts opened. Each worshiper left transformed, carrying with them the undeniable sense that God had touched their lives, not through thunder or lightning, but through bread, faith, and the extraordinary revelation of His presence. And so began the long path from wonder to recognition, a path that would test faith, confront doubt, and ultimately lead to one of the most remarkable acknowledgments of divine intervention in modern history. The ordinary Mass had become eternal, and nothing in Villicaner would ever be the same. After the miraculous Mass in Villicaner, the village was forever changed. Yet amid the awe and whispered prayers, a quieter question began to take root. How could something so ordinary, so simple, become so extraordinary? The host, resting silently on the altar, seemed to answer without words, but the world beyond the church walls demanded more than silent reverence. In the days following November 15, 2013, the parish became a place of pilgrimage. Devotees arrived from neighboring villages, from distant towns, and even from across the state of Kerala. Some came seeking signs, others in desperate prayer, but all left touched by the same sense that something divine had chosen to reveal itself in their midst. Many wept openly, feeling an inexplicable closeness to Christ through a single sacred wafer. Children, with wide eyes and innocent hearts, stared in awe. The elderly whispered thanks and prayers they had long carried in silence. Yet amid the devotion, the village also faced the quiet weight of doubt. Could this truly be a miracle, or was it a trick of nature, a coincidence amplified by faith and imagination? Some villagers wrestled with their own skepticism, afraid to hope too much, afraid to question their own senses. The host remained unchanged, the face clear and unmistakable, yet the world outside Villicaner demanded proof, evidence that would withstand scrutiny. Father Thomas understood this tension. The host was sacred, holy, beyond comprehension, yet the responsibility of his discovery weighed on him heavily. He meticulously documented the events, the date, the time, the reactions of the faithful, the subtle changes in light and shadow. He photographed the host from multiple angles, recording every minute detail. Every day, he prayed for guidance, seeking wisdom to balance devotion with responsibility. Soon, the local bishop of the diocese arrived to witness the phenomenon firsthand. He knelt quietly before the host, allowing the image to speak to him as it had to so many others. The bishop's expression was solemn, reverent, and yet marked with cautious thought. He recognized the profound spiritual significance, but he also understood that miracles do not exist in isolation. They must be carefully discerned, examined, and verified. A formal investigation began. Scientists and theologians were consulted. Specialists in chemistry, biology, and optical phenomena examined the host. Every method available to modern science was applied: microscopy, spectroscopy, and chemical analysis. Each test sought a natural explanation, a flaw in the baking process, a contaminant, or an optical illusion. Yet no explanation sufficed. The face remained, vivid and enduring, unaltered by light, temperature, or handling. The more they tested, the more the mystery deepened. Theologians reflected on the spiritual significance. They pondered the symbolism, the context of the Mass, and the historical precedents of Eucharistic miracles. Could this be a message from God? A visible reminder that the divine is present even in the most ordinary moments of life? The more questions they asked, the clearer it became that this was not merely an anomaly. It was a sign, a bridge between heaven and earth, humility and grandeur, silence and revelation. Meanwhile, the villagers continued their devotions. Pilgrims came daily, kneeling before the altar for hours, singing hymns, reciting prayers, seeking blessings, and sometimes simply staring at the host, unable to look away. Each person who witnessed the face carried the experience with them. Some returned home transformed, inspired to live lives more faithful, more compassionate. Others felt an urgent call to share the story, knowing it might bring hope to those who had lost their way. The tension between belief and doubt, awe and inquiry, created a sacred stillness around the church. The host seemed to hold its own rhythm, neither fading nor changing, neither demanding nor explaining. It simply existed, a presence that invited contemplation, reflection, and prayer. Every visitor sensed it differently, but all agreed on one undeniable truth. Something extraordinary had occurred, something that could not be dismissed. As months passed, news of the miracle slowly spread beyond Kerala. Letters were sent to Rome, reports compiled in meticulous detail. Photographs and scientific analyses were dispatched to scholars and church authorities. The Vatican received the first reports cautiously, aware that claims of miracles must be verified with extreme care. They began to monitor the case, assigning theologians and scientific experts to review the evidence. Through this process, Villa Connor became both a place of pilgrimage and a place of silence. Pilgrims came in crowds, yet the church retained a quiet dignity, a sense that the miracle was both intimate and universal. The host did not shout, did not command attention, but its presence spoke with clarity and power. Those who came felt it, and those who left carried its message, the message that God is near, even in the smallest forms, even in the simplest acts of devotion. Father Thomas continued his daily duties, but now every Mass he celebrated was touched by a new gravity. Each consecration reminded him of the extraordinary event. Each host he held was a call to humility, awe, and faithful service. He often reflected on the paradox of miracles. They are both profoundly public and deeply personal. The world could scrutinize, measure, and debate, but the faithful experience the miracle in the depths of their hearts, where reason alone cannot reach. The first years of silence, inquiry, and quiet devotion laid the foundation for what would come next. The miracle was no longer confined to Villacanor. It had begun its journey to the world. Letters, reports, and analyses traveled from Kerala to Rome, from laboratories to seminaries, from parish archives to the desks of the highest authorities in the Church. Yet in all this, the face remained, unchanging, silent, eternal. A testament that, in the midst of ordinary life, the extraordinary could emerge. And in the midst of silence, God could speak in ways the world was only beginning to understand. The stage was set. The ordinary Mass had become extraordinary. The faithful had seen, and the world had begun to ask, what truly lies beyond what our eyes can see? What message had God left, and who would bear witness? And so the host waited, 12 years in patient mystery, while the faithful prayed, scientists analyzed, and the world remained on the edge of disbelief and hope. It was a silence pregnant with meaning, a stillness filled with anticipation, a sign waiting for recognition. In Vilacanor, the miracle had begun. The world had yet to understand it.
The image of Christ's face on the host did not fade with time. It endured through the seasons, witnessed countless prayers, and silently watched as the faithful continued to visit Vilacanor. Yet for the Church, for science, and for the world beyond the village, the question remained the same. Could this be explained, or was it truly a miracle? From the moment the first reports reached the diocese, a careful and deliberate process began. Scientists arrived, theologians were consulted, and every conceivable method of analysis was employed. The host was subjected to meticulous examination, microscopic inspections, chemical analyses, spectroscopy, and other advanced scientific techniques designed to uncover any anomaly. Each test was precise, professional, and exhaustive. Yet with each passing day, the mystery only deepened. The image on the host resisted explanation. It was not painted. It was not printed. It bore no pigments, no foreign material. It was made entirely of the same substance as the Eucharist itself, ordinary bread transformed by something extraordinary. Theologians reflected on the spiritual dimensions of the phenomenon. Could this be a Eucharistic miracle, one of the rare instances in history where God allowed himself to be visibly present in the sacrament? They studied the event with care, comparing it with historical records, examining patterns, and considering the context of the Mass, the faithful, and the simple village where the miracle had occurred. For Father Thomas, the 12 years that followed were a test of patience, faith, and humility. Every day he celebrated Mass with the knowledge that the world was watching, even if many had yet to understand. The villagers continued to pray, their devotion unshaken, yet they too felt the tension between faith and the necessity of validation. Pilgrims arrived, bringing their own questions and fears, seeking reassurance and affirmation. During this time, the Church maintained a careful balance. Investigations were conducted with utmost respect for the sacredness of the host. Scientific teams documented their findings without interference, ensuring that nothing compromised either the integrity of the sample or the dignity of the ritual. Reports were compiled meticulously, each detail scrutinized and cross-referenced. The process was slow. The Vatican scrutiny required patience, evidence, and corroboration. Letters were exchanged between Vilacanor and Rome, each document weighed, each conclusion examined. For some, the waiting was frustrating. For others, it became a form of devotion, a prayer in itself, an exercise in trusting God's timing.
Yet doubt never fully disappeared. Some questioned whether human perception had been fooled, whether faith had magnified a natural phenomenon into something miraculous. Others questioned why, if this was indeed divine, it had chosen such a quiet corner of the world, away from the bustling cities, away from the eyes of the world. Through it all, the host remained unchanged. It endured scrutiny without complaint, quiet in its witness, steadfast in its presence. Each test, each analysis, each report brought no final answer, only more certainty that something beyond understanding had occurred. It was as if the face itself was a silent teacher, reminding humanity that faith and reason must coexist, that miracles do not always conform to expectations, and that divine timing is never hurried. As years passed, the story of Vatican spread quietly yet persistently. Articles were written, theologians spoke in seminars, and pilgrims continued to arrive. The miracle became a subject of discussion not only for the faithful, but for those curious about the boundaries of science, spirituality, and the inexplicable. Each visitor who stood before the host sensed the weight of the divine mystery, the profound, humbling truth that some things cannot be explained, only witnessed. In this delicate balance between faith and inquiry, the Church remained patient. Investigators recognized the gravity of declaring a miracle. The evidence had to be irrefutable, the phenomenon undeniable, the spiritual significance beyond question. And slowly, meticulously, the files moved from Kerala to Rome to the desks of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. 12 years passed in quiet anticipation. 12 years in which the faithful in Vatican prayed daily. Scientists continued to examine, and theologians continued to reflect. Each year added weight to the miracle's authenticity. Each passing season reinforced the steadfastness of the host. Finally, the moment of recognition approached. The Vatican, after years of careful analysis, consultation, and reflection, was ready to speak. The miracle that had begun in a small village in Kerala, witnessed by a few dozen faithful and countless pilgrims, was about to be affirmed for the world to see. Yet even in anticipation, the host remained silent. It did not announce the coming recognition. It did not demand attention. It simply existed, waiting for the time ordained. And in its stillness, it taught a final, profound lesson, that faith is patient, that divine truth does not rush, and that miracles are revealed not only in the extraordinary moment of appearance, but in the long, enduring witness of time, devotion, and unwavering hope.
The world beyond Vatican would soon learn of this miracle. The Church would declare it authentic. Pilgrims would continue to arrive in greater numbers. And the faithful would continue to witness a truth that, although difficult to explain, needed no explanation. The presence of God, enduring in silence, steadfast in love, and visible in the most ordinary of forms. The ordinary had become extraordinary. The miracle had withstood the tests of science and reason, and now it was poised to enter the history of the Church, waiting to be formally recognized, a testament to patience, faith, and the enduring mystery of God's grace. 12 years had passed since that fateful morning in Vatican, and the world had changed in ways both ordinary and extraordinary. Yet in a small village in Kerala, the host remained, silently bearing the image of Christ, enduring the scrutiny of science, the curiosity of theologians, and the prayers of generations. What began as a quiet miracle in a modest church had traveled far beyond its humble walls, carrying with it the hope, wonder, and faith of countless souls. In May 2025, the world was about to witness the culmination of this long journey. The Vatican, after more than a decade of careful investigation, deliberation, and reflection, was prepared to speak. For Father Thomas, the villagers, and the pilgrims who had never wavered in their devotion, it was a moment that had been awaited with prayerful hearts and trembling anticipation. As the news reached Vatican, the village seemed to hold its breath. Children who had grown into young adults still remembered that morning in 2013. Elderly parishioners who had knelt in awe and whispered prayers now wept openly, overwhelmed by the realization that their witness was about to be recognized on a global scale. The ordinary church, with its modest altar and familiar walls, had become a gateway to something eternal. The announcement was delivered not as a spectacle, but as a declaration of truth, steeped in solemnity and reverence. The Vatican officially recognized the host of Vatican as a Eucharistic miracle, authentic and beyond natural explanation. It was a proclamation that affirmed faith, honored devotion, and acknowledged the enduring mystery of God's presence in the world. In Rome, letters were read aloud in hallowed halls. Theologians and representatives of the Holy See gathered to review the decades of documentation, photographs, and scientific analysis. Reports spoke of the host's enduring image, the absence of foreign substances, and the impossibility of natural explanation.
But beyond the data, the declaration was about faith, the faith of those who had witnessed, who had prayed, who had believed. Back in Villacanor, Father Thomas knelt before the altar. Tears streamed down his face as he touched the sacred wafer that had become a symbol of divine presence. The congregation joined him, hands raised in gratitude, voices trembling with emotion. The miracle, once confined to quiet whispers and humble awe, was now a testament recognized by the Church itself. The villagers' joy was profound, yet tempered with humility. They had not sought fame or recognition, they had only lived their lives in devotion. Now their faith was validated, not for their glory, but for the glory of God. Pilgrims arrived from across India and beyond, eager to witness the host, to pray, to be near something that had transcended the ordinary and become eternal. The recognition also brought reflection. Scientists, who had once approached the host with skepticism, found themselves humbled by the inexplicable. Theologians, who had studied the phenomenon in archives and seminaries, were reminded that the divine cannot always be measured or confined to human understanding. And the faithful, who had waited years in quiet devotion, experienced a surge of confirmation that their prayers, their awe, and their unwavering faith had not been in vain. On May 10, 2025, the official declaration was published. By the end of the month, the Vatican arranged a solemn ceremony in Villacanor to commemorate the recognition. Representatives from Rome, clergy, pilgrims, and villagers gathered in the small church, which had been transformed into a place of radiant light, filled with the murmurs of prayers and the soft glow of candles. The host was placed at the center of the altar, not as an object of curiosity, but as a sacred testament to God's enduring presence. As the ceremony unfolded, a profound stillness settled over the congregation. The weight of 12 years of anticipation, devotion, and reflection seemed to dissolve into a single moment. Father Thomas raised the host, and the crowd held its collective breath. The face of Christ, as it had been seen in 2013, shone once more, unwavering, luminous, eternal. For many, it was overwhelming. Tears streamed freely. Voices choked in whispered prayers. Some fell to their knees, some pressed their faces to the altar, and all felt a sense of intimacy with the divine that words could scarcely capture. The miracle had become more than a phenomenon. It was a living encounter with God, a tangible manifestation of grace, hope, and love. Outside the church, the news spread rapidly. Stories were shared in newspapers, online forums, and religious publications around the world. Pilgrims and faithful from faraway lands began traveling to Kerala, seeking the host, hoping to witness firsthand the miracle that had withstood the tests of time, science, and reason. And while the world marveled, those who had been closest to the miracle understood its true significance. It was not merely the image on the host that mattered, but the faith it inspired, the prayers it nurtured, and the lives it transformed. In that small village, in the quiet corners of Christ the King Church, the miracle continued to teach its lessons. It reminded humanity that God speaks in silence as powerfully as in thunder, that faith can endure years of doubt and uncertainty, and that even the simplest, most ordinary forms can carry extraordinary messages. It was a testament to the power of patience, devotion, and unwavering trust in the divine. As the sun set on Villacanor that May, the church glowed with candlelight and the quiet hum of prayer. Pilgrims lingered, unwilling to leave the sacred space. Father Thomas looked upon the host, now recognized by the highest authority in the church, and whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for recognition, but for the privilege of witnessing God's mystery unfold in his lifetime. The world had spoken. The Vatican had recognized the miracle. But in that moment, in that small church, the miracle remained intimate, personal, and eternal. It was a reminder that faith is not always loud, miracles are not always grand, and God's presence is often found in the quiet, patient, and enduring moments that transform lives forever. And so, 12 years after that first extraordinary Mass, Villacanor became a beacon, a place where heaven had touched earth, where the ordinary became eternal,
and where every visitor who knelt before the host could feel, in the depths of their heart, the unshakable truth that God is near, always, even in the simplest of forms.
The sun rose over Vilacanur, casting golden light across the quiet village streets. 12 years had passed since that first extraordinary morning in 2013, and yet the memory remained vivid, unbroken, alive in the hearts of all who had witnessed it. The miracle of the host, the face of Christ appearing on the Eucharist, was no longer a secret. It had become a testament to faith, patience, and the enduring mystery of God. Pilgrims still traveled from across India and around the world, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by a desire to encounter the divine. For many, the journey to Vilacanur was more than a physical pilgrimage. It was a spiritual quest, a search for hope, peace, and affirmation of belief. They came carrying burdens, doubts, and prayers, and they left transformed, touched by the simple yet profound truth that God's presence is alive, tangible, and personal. The miracle spoke in a language beyond words. It reminded the faithful that holiness can be found in the most ordinary forms: a small piece of bread, a quiet mass, a humble village church. It revealed that God's love is patient, waiting for hearts ready to receive it, often showing itself slowly, over time, through devotion, reflection, and unwavering faith. Father Thomas, now older, still celebrated Mass with the same reverence, though each day carried the weight of the extraordinary. Every host he held was a reminder of the mystery he had witnessed. The lives changed and the faith strengthened. For him, the miracle was not merely an image to be studied, but a living encounter, a call to continue serving God with humility and devotion. The Vatican recognition in May 2025 had brought global attention, yet those who experienced the miracle most deeply understood its intimate significance. It was not the proclamation that made the event miraculous, but the way it touched hearts, inspired faith, and renewed hope. The faithful in Vilacanur learned a profound lesson. Miracles are not always about spectacle, but about transformation, the transformation of ordinary lives through encounters with the divine. Scholars and scientists continued to study the host, but the more they analyzed, the more it became clear that explanation alone could not capture the essence of the miracle. The face of Christ was a sign, a bridge between heaven and earth, between faith and reason, between the seen and the unseen. It spoke to the soul, awakening awe and reverence and leaving a permanent imprint on the hearts of those who beheld it. Stories emerged from around the world of people inspired by the miracle. Some wrote letters of gratitude, recounting how faith had been rekindled. Others shared personal transformations, lives of despair renewed, families reconciled, and communities strengthened. The miracle had transcended its physical presence, becoming a symbol of God's enduring care for humanity.
In Vilacanur, every Mass held before the host was now an encounter with eternity. Pilgrims knelt in silence, meditating on the humility of God, who revealed himself not in grandeur, but in the simplicity of bread. Children who had been too young to witness the original event now listened to stories told by elders, learning that faith can endure doubt, that miracles may appear quietly, and that God's presence is always waiting for those who seek it with open hearts. The miracle also served as a reflection for the wider world. It reminded humanity that faith and reason are not enemies, but companions on the journey toward truth. Science may analyze, theologians may interpret, and the world may debate. Yet the essence of the miracle exists beyond human measurement. It is in the experience of awe, the spark of belief, and the quiet understanding that there are mysteries too vast, too beautiful, and too divine to be fully comprehended. And so, the host of Vilacanur remains, a humble wafer bearing the face of Christ, ordinary in form, yet extraordinary in meaning. It continues to invite the faithful into prayer, reflection, and communion with God. It calls humanity to recognize that the sacred can exist in the simplest things, that miracles are timeless, and that the divine can touch the human heart in ways that transcend logic, explanation, and expectation. For those who kneel before it,
the miracle offers a lasting truth. God is near. He walks with us, in silence and in light, in bread and in flesh, in the moments we least expect and the places we might overlook. The image on the host is a reminder that heaven has not abandoned the world, that faith endures through time, and that the extraordinary can emerge from the ordinary if we are ready to see it with open eyes and hearts. As pilgrims depart Vilacanur, carrying prayers and hope back into their lives, the host remains on the altar, steadfast, luminous, eternal. It waits patiently, inviting the next generation of faithful to witness, to wonder, and to believe. It is a miracle that continues not because of recognition or science or fame, but because it is alive in the hearts of all who encounter it. In the quiet church of Christ the King, under the gentle light filtering through the stained glass, the miracle whispers a simple, profound message, that God is present, always, patiently, lovingly, and eternally, in bread, in faith, and in the hearts of all who seek Him. And so, the story ends not with closure, but with invitation, to witness, to believe, and to allow the mystery of God to transform the ordinary moments of life into encounters with eternity. Years have passed since the Vatican officially recognized the Eucharistic miracle of Vilacanur. Yet the story continues to unfold, not in headlines, but in the hearts of those touched by faith, devotion, and divine mystery. The small village, once known only to locals, has become a beacon, a quiet center of pilgrimage where people from around the globe gather to witness, to pray, and to experience something greater than themselves. The church itself, humble and whitewashed, seems unchanged at first glance. Its wooden doors creak as pilgrims enter, its floors bear the soft footsteps of countless visitors, and the air still carries the scent of incense. Yet within, the presence of God feels unmistakable, tangible, and enduring. The host, still on the altar, remains as it has always been, simple bread, luminous with the face of Christ, eternal in meaning. Visitors arrive with questions, doubts, or silent curiosity. Some are skeptics, eager to understand the phenomenon with science or reason. Others come in search of solace, carrying grief, burdens, or prayers they do not know how to voice. And yet, regardless of intent, they leave transformed. The miracle does not demand belief. It invites it, quietly, patiently, through awe, silence, and grace. Stories continue to emerge. Families reconciled after years of division, individuals healed emotionally or spiritually, communities strengthened by renewed faith. Children grow up learning of the host and of the quiet miracles God places in ordinary life. Pilgrims from distant countries travel with hope in their hearts, carrying prayers that span oceans and leave with renewed faith and inspiration. Father Thomas, now elderly, walks the church aisles with a calm reverence. Each Mass is both ordinary and extraordinary, a continuation of the miracle's quiet ministry. Every host he holds, every prayer he hears, carries the echo of that first moment in 2013, the day heaven whispered its presence into the life of a small village. The miracle has become a bridge across cultures, generations, and languages. It speaks to people who have never met, yet share the same awe and wonder. It reminds humanity that God's work is not bound by geography, and that divine presence can appear in ways we may never fully comprehend. Even scientists who once approached the host with skepticism speak now of its unexplainable nature. While reason may study, measure, and question, it cannot capture the fullness of what those who witness experience. Faith, after all, is not about proof alone. It is about encounter, awe, and the transformation of the heart.
In Vilacanur, the church has become more than a building. It is a living testament. Pilgrims kneel in quiet prayer, lighting candles, touching the altar, and leaving offerings of devotion. Some sit in silence for hours, simply gazing at the host, feeling the presence of Christ in ways both profound and intimate. Others share their stories with strangers, creating a chain of faith that reaches across the world. The miracle endures because it is alive in prayer, in reflection, and in the simple act of belief.
It has shown that God's presence is not always dramatic or loud, but patient, subtle, and transformative. It reminds the faithful that the extraordinary can emerge from the ordinary, that divine grace can appear in the simplest of forms, and that God's love is steadfast, waiting for hearts ready to receive it. And so, the story of Vilakkanur does not end with recognition, or headlines, or even understanding. It continues in every heart that kneels, in every prayer whispered, in every act of faith sparked by the quiet power of a sacred host. It lives in the children who hear the story, the families who come together, and the countless souls who discover that miracles are real and that God is near. The miracle lives on, not as an event frozen in time, but as an enduring presence, a reminder that faith, hope, and divine love persist in the world. It is a call to believe, to witness, and to allow the ordinary moments of life to be transformed by God's extraordinary grace. And in the quiet glow of candlelight, beneath the gaze of the eternal face on the host, the faithful understand. God has not left them. He walks among them still, patient, loving, and infinitely present, in every piece of bread, every whispered prayer, and every heart willing to see. Vilakkanur is more than a place. It is a living miracle, and its light will continue to shine for generations to come.